Hello everyone. This is not a story for the faint of heart. Today, we will be stepping into the darkness of the most gruesome cases, where evil not only exists, but also leaves bloody and haunting traces. This is Real Gruesome Murder Cases, a series of true stories about murders that made the whole world shudder. If you are ready to face the cold truth and the gruesome corners of humanity, come with me to delve deeper into each case. Neptune's Lair. When I met her, word on the street was that Esme was beyond help. Her friends called her crazy and borderline. By the religiously inclined of former times, she might have been thought of as demon-possessed. During drunken fits, she'd get into fistfights or threaten to throw herself from freeway overpasses. She walked a thin line and repeatedly upset rumors of her demise, taking immense pride in being what she called stronger than dirt. She had a breathalyzer in her car. 2 years ago, she'd overturned her Hyundai in an incident where she was discovered to be 3 times over the legal blood alcohol limit. She made financial ends meet by renting her body out for clinical trials, hoping the entire time that she'd taken placebos instead of the experimental medications upstart pharmaceutical companies produced for everything from bipolar disorder to angina. There were times she'd come home from one of these lab rat money runs with side effects, bad ones, but they'd eventually subside and she'd make jokes about how at least she hadn't become the victim of sudden death syndrome. That Esme, tougher than dirt, as resilient as rubber. Even though she smoked all my stuff, drank all my wine, and frequently resorted to flings with Little Dicky, a former boyfriend I suspected provided her with something I couldn't, I felt something for her. I made what I called minimum rage, flipping beef patties and assembling burgers at a late-night boardwalk diner called Cracker Jack's. Before the week was up, with Esme's and my drug debts, I'd be begging tourists for change to buy spare cigarettes. For a while, we resided in a tent on the rooftop of a building where Desmond Tutu Phillips, a friend since freshman year in high school, was the apartment building manager. Desmond risked losing his job for giving Esme and me a key to the restricted access rooftop. Despite our unconventional ways, he had the patience of Jesus with us. Even so, I'd still piss over the side of the building, and Esme would relieve herself where and whenever convenient. When we got too grungy, we'd take care of our hygiene needs at the showers meant for beachgoers. At night, we read copiously by battery-operated lantern light and shared a predilection for somber stuff. Our favorites were Rimbaud, Baudelaire, Camus, and Hamid. When we tired of the Cracker Jack's grub I'd bring to our squatter pad, we'd get high and end up eating red velvet cake and whatever else she'd send me to shoplift from the supermarket, a 10-minute walk away. On the stroll back home, paranoid from the nearly toxic cosmic kush, and with my backpack stuffed with our pilfered renegade sustenance, I'd be startled by the sounds of passing cars, thinking a cop was sooner or later bound to stop me for stealing Esme's and my daily booze and bread. Although I feared the cops, I always suspected my weed paranoia was caused by a much deeper-seated guilty conscience. I should have confronted Little Dicky a long time ago. Also, I had left my mother's side when I felt her senescence was becoming a burden. There's no way I had the resolve or character to be the caregiver for an aging parent. When I confessed these thoughts to Esme, she'd dismiss my concerns and say I needed to stop overthinking things. I remember once when Esme and I were walking home from a party, she said, pointing to a couple of graffiti-spraying gangbangers, "Javier, I'm scared. That guy with the Supreme hoodie has a gun." He pointed it at me, never sure whether she really meant such things, but fueled by drug and alcohol-induced courage, I confronted the guy. "Hey man," I said to the one Esme had referred to, You know what I am? A janky spick boy with a death wish, he answered with a sneer. No, I'm a delinquent out to get delinquents. What you gonna do with that heater? Turns out he didn't have a gun, just another can of neon spray paint, but he wasn't overly enthused by the tete-to-tete I had with him. He and his friend didn't kick my ass, but Mr. Supreme sprayed me in the eyes with the paint. Esme started mouthing off to him, but even though I was partially blinded, I pulled her away for fear that we'd both get battered. Those are the kind of stupid things I'd do for Esme, but the important thing to me was she would call me things like her ballsy little soldier and lavish me with affection after I'd go out on a limb for her. I put blood, sweat, and tears into the relationship, and rarely did I think it wasn't worth it. The end of our star-crossed romance began after Esme came back from the free clinic where Dr. For the People, Randolph Hamilton, told her she had cervical cancer. After she heard the diagnosis, Esme became determined to go out with a bang. She began visiting Little Dicky more frequently. She demanded I steal tequila instead of wine from the supermarket, and when she drank the Patron I'd bring to our squatter's abode. Her temper became hair-trigger sensitive. The only respite I'd get from her gloomy rages would come when I'd invite her to the beach when the moon was full. Apparently, Little Dicky had something against doing things that smacked of romance or chivalry with her. Moonlit midnight swims in the Pacific were one such pastime Dicky didn't seem to have a taste for. On the nights Esme and I'd sink our toes into the wet sand while the moon's phantasmagorical light reflected onto the dark side of the earth, she'd momentarily forget about her terminal diagnosis. She'd also forget about her mortal condition whenever we'd watch movies at the rooftop squat. I don't know if it's the case with most people, but when I'm high and watching a good flick, I'll hear messages in the movie's dialogue. I'll also interpret anything someone says out loud about the film to have personal relevance. I've heard these phenomena are called thoughts of reference by those in the field of mental health. Schizophrenics have them, but I guess when I'm high, I might get a little schizophrenic. Makes me wonder why I keep smoking the Cosmic Kush. But one night, while viewing Scarface with Esme for the 5th or 6th time, she said something along the lines of, "God, it's just so good. I can't get enough of it." To my cognitively distorting and high mind, Esme wasn't talking about the film's extended denouement where Tony Montana gets shot by his sister, then exterminates a battalion of rival narco-gangster cockroaches before he ends up floating face down, bloodied and bullet-riddled in his "The World Is Yours" Miami drug boss mansion. No, Esme wasn't talking about the film. My mind interpreted her statement as referring to her relationship with Little Dicky. Before Montana gets the shotgun blast in the back that finally does him in, Esme exclaimed, "Jesus, we all know he's doomed." When she said that, I couldn't help but believe that she was referring to our friend and benefactor, Desmond. If for whatever reason Desmond was doomed, Esme and I would soon be off the rooftop and into the street, nowhere for a loving couple to be, especially when one in the pair has terminal cancer. I didn't know whether Esme's words would attract fate, but I knew that her despair was making her behave more erratically. She started to break down in tears when she'd think of having to be holed up in a hospital or hospice, awaiting the inevitable during the last stages of her disease. That night after the movie, and while coming down off the perception-altering shrubbery, I decided to take a course of action. The next morning, I bought 2 tabs of acid off Tripster Todd, a boardwalk dealer of LSD, and various other hallucinogens. I told Esme that we'd go for a swim at the beach after I got off my shift at midnight. We walked to the beach at close to 2 a.m. On the way there, I picked a purple flower. whose name I didn't know from a garden in front of a well-tended house. As we walked, I put the flower in Esme's hair. The moonless night sky's inkiness was blinding. The tide was low, and we had to walk a good distance to the water. There was no one on that portion of the beach except for us. As she dipped down into the waters ahead of me, Esme expressed her gratefulness for not having any open wounds, given that a recent outbreak of carnivorous bacteria made coastal immersions risky for bathers thusly exposed. Before going waist-deep into the water, I surreptitiously took the 2 tabs of LSD I'd bought from Tripster. After letting the acid dissolve, I gave Esme a prolonged French kiss. In little time, my vision, swayed by the acid, started playing tricks on me. Although there was virtually no light on the beach, my eyes summoned a warm, radiant glow in the heavens above. "Jav, I feel funny," said Esme. I splashed her with water and told her that she was okay, that everything was going to be okay. I knew what I had to do. I played out a dialogue in my mind where I said, "You need to confess," and asked her why she was always going to see little Dickie. In my mind, she responded, "My lips are sealed." "That's exactly what they aren't," my courageous imagination told her. We were up to our solar plexuses in the ocean. I took hold of her shoulders and dunked her beneath. She came up, laughed, then giddy from the acid, childishly said, "Jav, I'm going to die." I said, "No, you're not, love. You're going to live forever. Remember, Esmeralda Lucero is tougher than dirt." I repeated the dunking gesture, this time less playfully, taking a fraction of a second longer than Esme deemed comfortable for her to be under the tide. The 3rd time I dunked her was even more forceful. She struggled in my grip under the water. I crossed a threshold. She freed herself from my hold, surfaced, then said, "What do you think you're doing?" More in the form of an exclamation than a question. I smiled. The white of my teeth infuriated Esme more. "It's not funny, you hijo de puta. Why do I feel like I'm tripping?" She screamed before trying to dig her nails into my eyes. The time had arrived. I knew the cure. I put her neck into a vice-like hold in the crook of my right elbow and dunked her under the dark waters again. Her arms flailed about. She tried to kick, she writhed, but I held fast. I could hear her submerged cries, but they were muffled and accompanied by an up-bubbling of exasperated air. Her writhing gradually slowed down until she managed a last, weak exhalation and final spasm, and then yielded her spirit to the Pacific Ocean. I left her body floating where I had drowned it. Even though no one had heard or seen what transpired, I was still tripping on the acid, and the walk back to Desmond's apartment building was haunted by bogeymen and illusionary images of people pointing fingers and whispering accusations. I climbed the stairs to the rooftop where my unhoused person's hovel was located, lit a cigarette, and was overcome by an urge to write a song. I took out my notebook and a pen and started scribbling. Moonless night, world's delight, me, you drowning, out of sight, we fear most. Give up the ghost, but before we do, let's make a toast on our tongues. Still feeling young, summon moon, and avoid the sun. We'll be scared, 'cause we've dared. Court Pluto, in Neptune's lair. I put the pen down, satisfied with the verses, and thought of the poor and beaten down, of the fact that we are all victims to the onslaught of implacable and incorrigible time. I thought of what could have been, and of what now would never be between Esme and me. After another cigarette, I laid on my rooftop sleeping bag, unable to forgive myself, despite my best intentions, for the simple thing, the merciful thing I'd done. Before I knew it, I had cried myself to a still and unrepentant slumber, the sleep of both the wolf and the lamb, of the innocently voracious and the imperfectly innocent, the interstellar murder hobo, first trooper Lundgren Morrissey. Constabulary grid. 7H6 of Earth's solar militia woke drowsily from what felt like a thick fog tinged green with a mild sense of nausea. He wasn't uncomfortable, but understood the night was over, and his hangover was coming, slowly creeping into his body from a distance. What did I do last night? I remember the girl Adrian sent, and drinking, so much drinking. He didn't feel much concern over his lack of memory. It wasn't his first blackout. Some memories always returned, and there was the footage to look forward to. He furrowed his brow as slowly growing behind his eyes, expanding over the top of his head. A headache made its presence known. It grew rapidly into a solid thump, forcing a hot gush of saliva flood his mouth, literally blushing his face with heat at the same time. Unable to control his own body, he rocked upwards to vomit, only to find himself restrained by the wrists above his head. With a viscous blub, the vomit tried to project, only to flop back into his mouth, down his chin, neck, and chest. This just induced another almighty heave, this time sensibly spilling it to his right. It pooled against his cheek. He slowly turned his face to the left in a lethargic bid to find reprieve. He took a moment to catch his breath and tried to open his eyes. The room was pitch black, and he questioned whether he had opened them at all. What did I let myself get into last night? He tried moving his legs, and found them restrained as well. Ugh, enough of this. Hello, he croaked, his throat dry. The vomit had settled in the wells of his body weight, coating the back of his neck, sticking viscously to his right cheek and chin. He was getting annoyed that the girl had left him like this. He thrashed his whole body in a vain attempt to break out with brute force, to no avail. He just soiled himself even further. Just as he cleared his throat to shout, a stark light flashed on, and a steady, mature female voice spoke. Oh, for fuck's sake. It held no emotion. I guess we'll need to clean this up before we begin. You drank too much. My dosage off. Lundgren tried to get a look at her, squinting his eyes against the light, exacerbating his headache. She was small, no taller than 5 feet, and very slight. Definitely not the girl Adrian sent. He didn't recognize her at all, but only really cared to consider his odds. I have the advantage. I just need to wait. I am going to give you a paralytic I designed whilst doing a job on Io's Gravitech station. It works almost instantly, clears you up, suppresses your emotions, and has no nasty side effects. It requires a continuous dose, though, so I'll add it to an IV. I'll restore some electrolytes while we're at it. He tried in vain to discern a tone in her voice. What do you mean by paralytic? His senses were returning to him, but only just. Did we, fuck or something? I am digging the bondage vibe and the aftercare, but I would like to be untied now. Oh, that's not a very good idea. At least not till you're fully paralyzed. The matter-of-fact tone sent a slight shiver down his spine. And no, we didn't, fuck or anything. The mimicry of his voice we perfect for tone and inflection. I need to clean you up, and to do that, I need to untie you. To do that, I would feel better if you weren't able to move. I trust my logic is clear. Lundgren considered his cool head under pressure a source of personal pride, which is why when panic started to tighten his chest, he was totally unprepared. His body froze as she stepped closer with a needle and IV bag in hand. He had no clue where they came from. It was like they had just materialized. He blinked to clear his vision a bit more, and watched as she deftly penetrated a vein on the back of his right hand with a needle, just as matter-of-factly as her words dug into his heart. She pinned the tube to his wrist with a programmable medi-strap and hung the bag on a hook on the wall. "What do you want with me?" he asked, craning his head to take a look at his surroundings. It was a stark white room with a titanium water cylinder, a sonic hygiene basin, and workstation to his right. The roof was made entirely of large rectangular light panels, and there was an assortment of hooks on the wall. There were no other items in the room. She didn't answer his question. "Both the paralytic and IV will take effect soon. Then we can begin." "What's the rush?" he asked. She smiled softly, locking eyes with him. "We're on a schedule." "How long have I been out?" "Oh, about 3 hours, maybe a bit longer." Lundgren noticed the first hint of emotion. Excitement? "Just long enough for me to drug you and get you here. I must commend you on your choice of location. Ganymede really has very little law enforcement." "Where's Adrian?" "I don't find this funny anymore." "Adrian's busy, and you are right to not be amused." She chuckled. It was soft and deep. "Did you know I walked out of that bar with your body draped over my shoulder? I just got into my shuttle and no one said a word. We are on the far side of Ganymede right now, in an uncharted crater. If you wanted to scream, no one would hear you." Lundgren was not ready to accept what he was being told. "I call bullshit on that." He even managed a laugh. "There is no way you could have carried me out. Look at you." He gestured at her with his eyes only. The paralytic really did work fast. She just smiled. "You are understandably confused. I suppose I could clarify by getting to the point." She closed her eyes as if she genuinely considering how to continue. As she opened them, she looked him right in his eyes. "I understand all of Earth's troopers are educated on the Interstellar murder Hobo?" "Yes." He didn't just know, he was obsessed. "What do you know?" she asked. "Detailed but concise, please." Like reporting to a superior officer, the information spilled from Lundgren. He felt almost eager. The IMH is generally considered to be a multi-generational serial killing syndicate that has been in operation for over 300 years. It was founded by a Vehestian smuggler from the sweep system named Kovai Nistrol, who hasn't been publicly cited in over 370 years. The MO and appearance of the killer has never changed in all that time, and we know that Nistrol was a questionable character. We suspect cloning. Considering the average Vehestian lives about 175 years, we think the torch has probably been passed 3 or 4 times. Lundgren paused and considered whether he should be feeling a little more frightened. There was certainly some anxiety, but it felt distant. He couldn't help but admit that she really had designed quite an effective little paralytic. The irony that his face remained unaffected, whilst the rest of him, both physically and emotionally, felt numb to all around him, hadn't escaped his notice. "Please continue," she instructed. Lundgren didn't know when he had surrendered the intimacy of eye contact. He simply found staring at a ceiling of lights more comfortable. She was on his right, calmly adjusting the bed, holding him prone to a 45-degree angle. Clearing his throat, he continued. "Thus far, we've confirmed 715 kills over 67 separate planetary systems right across the Milky Way galaxy. It is the only criminal case that has ever experienced galactic collaboration from all 89 systems' recognized law enforcement agencies. The most astonishing fact is, other than the footage, we have literally no other clues or evidence to build a case with." "Is that all?" she asked quietly. He looked at her through the corners of his eyes. She was over by the water cylinder. attaching a long hose and shower nozzle to a valve on the side. Well, there's a theory that all serial killers want to be caught, but the IMH has proven to be the exception. As I said, 0 sightings. There's never been a more successful criminal syndicate. And their motive? Vengeance. Is there anything pettier? There are several things actually, but continue. He chanced another look. She was adjusting something out of sight on top of the cylinder. The hose hung down the back of her left shoulder. They find people they consider victims whom have been denied justice via official means and take revenge on their behalf, completely. No one is left to continue the cycle of vengeance. He expelled a sigh that sounded almost like a sob. "This will be cold," she said, and turned on the hose without giving him a moment to protest. The water was indeed cold, and he gasped audibly. The pressure was decent for a cylinder setup. Of course, he could only feel that as she blasted him right in the face. Looking down, he could see a clotted, foamy spiral at the bottom as water and vomit drained away to who knows where. She made sure to get as much off of him as possible, even scrubbing his face with a rough cloth. The cold shock was the final catalyst in restoring his clarity. As she shut the valve on the cylinder, the room suddenly became very familiar. He'd just never imagined it from a victim's point of view before. The water cylinder, 5 feet tall, should have been the first clue, but the wide-rigged medical bed, the stark white walls and various fixtures, this was the IMH's killing room. Fuck. He said it with soft resignation, closing his eyes. "Alexei?" he asked, forcing himself to look at her. She simply smiled. "I suppose it's time things got interesting." She tilted her head, not breaking eye contact, and changed into a 9-foot artisan right in front of his eyes. Sporting a full complement of tusks, 4 arms, and thick, motley brown, leathery skin. With 2 enormous hands, she grabbed him by the chest, and with another, she deftly undid the restraints that held his wrists. He couldn't feel them. He simply observed their lifeless flap in his periphery. Careful not to disturb the IV and needle, she gently rested him forward, cradling him in 2 of her 4 hands. Hanging as though over a horse's rump, with his face facing towards the metal floor, he noticed rivets. With a free hand, she flipped the valve back on, and he felt the cold water blasting the back of his head. She made sure to get every last scrap of mucus, alcohol, and tiny chunks of stomach lining from his hair. He heard the telltale pattering of water blasting plastic as she cleaned the bed. Once done, she pinned him back against it and quickly lowered him into a horizontal position. She morphed back into her previous form. She wasn't young, but he couldn't fathom any sort of age in her either. She was certainly beautiful. She proceeded to gently tie his wrists back up above his head. It took the lock clunking loudly into place that brought him back to his senses, just enough to ask, "What are you?" "I am glad you asked." She wasn't looking at him, preoccupied with returning the cylinder and hose to their original places. "I am a changeling." "Impossible," he scoffed. "Possible," she challenged. "What did you just see?" As she spoke, she had moved over to the sonic hygiene basin and was fervently cleaning her arms and hands. The changelings from the Alpha Centauri system were all exterminated nearly 400 years ago. It was the only mass-sanctioned genocide, with a full vote from 89 out of 90 planetary systems. A vote held without our system, within which we lived peacefully among 3 other sentient spacefaring species. Most of them died with us, did you know? Only the fractions off-planet were spared. They are still trying to rebuild. Except for the changelings, who were all confirmed as being on planet within the Alpha Centauri system at the time. How did you survive? I had been abducted by Vehestian smuggler from the sweep system prior to your destruction of our system. I must have been given up for dead when I didn't return during the summons. She closed her eyes briefly with a pause, then continued. I certainly felt the yearning to return. It was incredibly painful. To be called home on such an instinctive level, to then be unable to return due to my unlawful confinement. She took another pause, but made firm eye contact, compelling him to remain silent. It nearly killed me, and it should have. With the destruction of my homeworld, the cosmic link compelling us to return each Centauri century was severed. As such, I survived. Is that why you kill? It's just personal vengeance all along? He felt comfort in the scorn he was able to insert in his tone. She laughed softly. No, it's not even why I started killing. That honor rests with the smuggler who repeatedly raped me every night for 12 years, which was how long it took me to build immunity to his variety of custom sedatives, by the way. He was guilty of other crimes, but I digress. I slowly tortured him to death, probably 9 years after being severed from the link. Why do you kill then? He asked as she removed the medi-strap and IV with ease, stowing it out of sight. The effects of the paralytic will wear off quickly. She continued without a pause. I kill because 5 years after I escaped my confinement, I found someone else denied justice, someone too pure and injured to take vengeance for themselves. I cared for him very much. That was over 367 years ago. The Vehestian smuggler, you use his face for all your killings, don't you? The fear welling in his chest felt like an ocean tide. There's no syndicate either. It's just been you all along? I do, and yes. She permitted a small pause to let that sink in then. I think it's time we got on with it. She walked over to the back wall and pressed gently against it. A small, previously imperceptible cabinet opened up. Inside was a camera link-up, a large red sledgehammer, and an assortment of torturing tools. She morphed into the Vehestian smuggler, now standing 6 feet tall. She pressed a small button on the side of the camera to start recording, sending the footage out to the whole system. Live. Do you understand why you are here? The smuggler's voice was deep, smooth, and seductive. He knew, and he saw now further point in wasting time. He was resigning himself to his fate. He knew his options, and opted for complete honesty. I shouldn't have won my case today. Correct, she affirmed. And do you recognize this? She held up a small rectangular drive, fitted with an illegal isolation port so the data contained cannot be detected, even when plugged into one of Earth's collection servers, which was basically all of them. Lundgren recognized it on an almost intimate level. Seeing it in her hands was like a violation. It's my diary, he replied, looking straight ahead of him. I suppose you want the encryption key? No, I'm good. I just wanted you and every single one of your accomplices to know I had this. You've all been very busy, with quite a variety of things. The paralytic had worn off completely, and Lundgren was very much aware of his body. The pain, discomfort, fear, and anxiety enveloped him like a landslide. He couldn't stop the tears singing his eyes, nor the sobbing noises of hyperventilation as panic consumed him. With a mighty crack, fire exploded across his left cheek. She had hit him hard. First Trooper Lundgren Morrissey, Constabulary Grid 7H6 of Earth's Solar Militia. You have 2 choices. She never once looked at the camera. Her focus was on him and the task ahead. She continued, You can confess, and I'll make it quick, or you can deny your crimes and face torture. First Trooper Morrissey, what do you choose? My case," he stuttered. "Rutger V. Morrissey. I am guilty of the crime he accused me of." "He confesses." He could hear the smile in her voice. "What crime was that? What was it that 14-year-old Alexei Rutgar accused you of?" I responded to a report of domestic abuse and neglect from a concerned neighbor. When I arrived on scene, Alexei had already been alone for 3 days, with neither food and nor money. His father was dead, and his mother appeared to have run off with another lover. He swallowed, not wanting to continue. "You know how this works. Speak, or I will make you." "I raped him, okay?" he blurted out. "And then we covered it up, like we always do." "Correct," she said. Lundgren knew what was coming and started hyperventilating again. He didn't have to look. "Lundgren Morrissey, by your own account," she said, holding the drive aloft. "You have raped or somehow sexually assaulted over 37 people, 28 of them minors, the youngest of which was only 6. You will be the first of many, and you will watch it coming." Lundgren knew not to close his eyes for fear of having his eyelids torn off. The very last thing he saw before it all went dark was the rapidly descending head of an enormous red sledgehammer as it slammed into his face. The devil is in the details. I was 16 years old when they found the 6 bodies underneath our living room floor. I'm not one to share personal details, mostly because I have a tendency to run my mouth and say too much. But I think about that night often, usually as I'm just crawling into bed, in that time between hazy wakefulness and deep rest, which, if I'm being honest, I've never been the greatest sleeper anyway. I'm at my most productive at night, and as a result, I spend a lot of time staring up at the ceiling, contemplating if it will be the night I spill all the messy details to some reporter that's trying to make it big. But then I think, the media has already had their fun with my family, and their exuberant reporting, rightly or wrongly, landed my good name in the history books by the time I turned 17. If I were to set the record straight, it would go a little something like this. I can't forget that sound. It's one of the most haunting things about that night, the thing I can't quite shake, and it has followed me my entire life. Thud, 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 thud. There was a hand at our front door, pounding incessantly. It sent shockwaves from the top of my head to the tips of my toes. I broke out in a cold sweat, realizing that the swirl of blue and red lights outside my window, paired with the pounding at the door, meant one thing: the police. My mother, who was notorious for sleeping through just about everything, raced into the hallway, and through the crack of my door, I could see her standing at the top of the stairs, hand to chest. She was wearing her favorite silky pink nightgown, the one that grazed the floor as she walked. She always looked like she was floating when she wore it. But in that moment, it dragged behind her in a fury. Thud, 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 thud. My panic didn't keep my curiosities at bay. I jumped down from my bed and padded toward the door. I peered out, waiting for what came next. My mother's voice was the first to break through the weighted silence. "What is it? What do you want?" she said. Then came a series of sentences that melted together. Talk of my father, where he was. My mother questioning if he got into an accident. Then a firm voice asking who was home. My mother's distress soared another octave. She demanded they call their commanding officer so she could talk to him or her directly. I had never seen her so angry before. I peered over the banister to find the 2 officers, standing on either side of my mother, in the entryway. "You have no right," my mother yelled. One of the officers mumbled something to her, Then she called out for me and my younger brother, Rob. I didn't want to descend those stairs. When the police are involved, a bad ending always follows, and I wasn't ready for my bad ending. "It's all right," he said, lifting his palm to us and gesturing to come down to the landing. With my brother under my arm, I took that first step down and stepped right into hell. They ambushed my father when he came home, tackled him as soon as he came through the door. Poor guy didn't even notice the 2 cop cars parked outside because he had spent the last few hours pounding down gin and tonics. While Robbie was watching TV in the living room, I snuck around the corner, walked down the hallway, and positioned myself outside the kitchen door. For some reason, the police thought the best place to question him was where we ate our food. "Tell me where the bodies are, Jimmy," one of the officers said. "I don't know," my father replied, but his voice betrayed him. He couldn't hide his shakiness. A grumble of incoherent words, then, more clearly, "Do you even have a warrant to be here?" My mother. She had watched one too many Law and Order episodes over the years. "It's a reasonable search, probable cause," said the other officer, his voice much deeper. "Don't need one when you pose an imminent threat to our community. You know me. You know my family," my father said, his voice fumbling on the word, family. "For God's sake," my mother yelled. "Don't say another word, James. We need our lawyer here." "Jimmy, we all know the kind of work you do, and considering the circumstances, I can't look the other way just because we're friends." My father was a scientist. That's what I told people who couldn't wrap their head around the industry jargon. But to those who really knew him and his work at the university, he was an expert in forensic and human sciences, criminal forensics, if we are being precise. He spent his days teaching people about chemical compounds, cleaning and evaluating dead bodies, and the proper techniques to preserve evidence. He was a brilliant man and an extraordinary teacher. I would know. I'm his kid, and he taught me everything. But if anyone knew how to get rid of a body, it was him. In the last 12 months, 7 university students had gone missing, 4 of which were directly enrolled in his graduate forensic seminar. The same faces that flashed across the nightly news had been in our home. They spent time on our front porch. They tossed back a beer or wine while discussing local crime scenes. They ate at our dinner table, studied in the hammock hanging between 2 willow trees in our backyard. He was even seen chumming it up with students at happy hours. If it wasn't clear already, my father loved his students, adored them, actually, to the point where he treated them like his own children, even though they weren't. "Did you really think people wouldn't notice, Jimmy?" an officer asked. Everyone noticed, I thought. How could you not? "Tell us," they pleaded. "It's time," they said. "Where are they? We have to bring them home. You don't need to hold this secret anymore, Jimmy." I have to admit that even though it's been 20 years since that night, their certainty in that moment still makes my blood boil. They had such confidence in their accusation, and so little to show in the way of proof. Because, let's be honest, a close relationship with a student is a pretty loose thread when it comes to tying someone to murder. Unfortunately, my father was at his limit for keeping secrets. "They're under the living room floor," he said. At that moment, I fell forward, spilling onto the kitchen floor. I had forgotten just how weak that door was, and I would pay greatly for my curiosity. Because even as I was staring down at the black and white tiles, hoping I was invisible, I could feel the weight of his gaze on me. And when I looked up, our eyes locked. I couldn't breathe. couldn't force my lungs to expand. This was it. This was that moment. The ending that I knew was coming. His eyes told me the only thing I needed to know. The details of that night have been bent and twisted by the media. So many stories, so little accuracy, which is ironic considering the news is supposed to hold itself to the highest level of truth. But I suppose I should give them some grace. They're only human, and humans get things wrong. But I digress. My father never spoke another word. Not at the police station, not in the trial, and definitely not to me. My last moments with my father were spent in observation while the police pulled my childhood home apart, while they dragged 6 bodies out from the depths of our foundation. You know what's funny? The guilt in his eyes turned to shock, and it got me thinking. Did he not predict it would turn out this way? Is this not the ending he imagined? My mother leaving his side, our home being torn apart, his daughter's presence as it all went down. Was he worried about the woman I would become if he was found guilty? I had so many questions. One very important one, but I wouldn't get to ask it that night. It didn't take long for a jury to convict him. Only 3 weeks. The fingerprints, clothing fibers, and driver's licenses hiding in our basement were enough to put him in jail for life without parole. And the papers complained it was too easy, that my father was the sloppiest yet most intelligent killer our town had seen. It was as if he wanted to get caught. One journalist said he was, and I quote, the only educated, well-versed scientist with a knack for murder and childish mistakes. He wouldn't have been able to clean up spilled milk. Let's be clear, my father was no idiot. He was not childish or impulsive. He was kind, warm, and exacting. He was present for everything in my life, showing up to every parent-teacher conference, soccer game, and choir concert. He showed great regard for my interests, encouraging me to try anything and everything, even if it was a bit odd. Like when I said I wanted a taxidermy kit and he bought me one the next day. He was a good father, not a monster. The only thing he was guilty of was spending an increasing amount of time with his students, to a point where he started missing family dinners and school events, then birthdays. But tabloids don't want to hear about the happy shit. They want the darkest parts of a family tragedy. They beg to hear about the warning signs, the late nights, how he protected the specifics of his work, holding the details of his day job like a precious piece of blown glass. They wanted to know about those nights my father caught me in his laboratory, poking around and playing with his chemicals and tools, or the panic in his eyes when he saw me playing in his sacred space, a place I was never allowed to explore on my own. Or they might have been more interested in how he hated when I spent too much time with his students, how I asked so many questions, got too close to young men that were twice my age. Certainly that detail would have popped in the tabloids, but I never gave an interview to the press. Actually, I never spoke to anyone about my childhood, or what was left of it after my mother slipped into a state of catatonic depression and my brother went to live with my uncle. Considering how fast people turned on my father and how much my life had imploded, I figured the best way to stay under the radar was to keep a tight lip. And once I turned 18, I moved to a completely different coast, changed my name, dyed my hair, curated a new life. But a new identity doesn't erase the truth. It can't kill biology or erase the girl that was. His history can't be escaped in cases like this, and my history called to me, over and over again. Even after I got married, had 2 children, and started a new job as a physician's assistant, I still thought about my other life, before I became this woman named Jennifer. After 20 years, I felt that tiny question nagging at me. One flight, and a 35-minute Uber later, I was standing just outside the jail that held the man I once called a father. All of those years without exchanging a single word. I couldn't be sure if he would even agree to see me. But then I remembered the man he was, how much he loved me and adored being a father. I willed myself to move and opened the door. I signed in at the visitor's desk and waited for the guard to come out and say that he would see me. Hours passed without a word, which chipped away at my confidence. But just as I was about to stand up and walk out, the door opened and I was ushered in. The room was small, warm from poor air circulation. It smelt of sweat and metal, with a splash of bleach and Windex. I'm sure my father hated the swirl of incompatible chemicals. I certainly couldn't stand it, but I swallowed my pride and sat in the only metal chair that was available. A few moments later, on the other side of the plexiglass wall, he sauntered in. His gaze was set on the floor, but I could make out the signs of aging on his face, no doubt from stress and time spent around mildewy walls. I leaned forward, picked up the phone. I waited for him to do the same. And when he did, he finally looked at me. So many years, so many memories between us, and one question. "So," I started, "do you want to know where I hid the seventh body, masterpiece of Malice?" In the bowels of a towering skyscraper that touched the clouds, in a room devoid of natural light, sat Japheth, a man whose fingers danced over the keyboard like a pianist lost in the throes of a concerto. With a pair of silver-framed glasses perched on the bridge of his nose, Japheth peered into the bright screen before him. Surrounding him were his colleagues, collectively known as the Warriors, each a genius in their own right, defending a massive financial empire from the dark underbelly of the digital world. The company they worked for managed the assets and transactions of millions, safeguarding the economic backbone of numerous nations. This was a responsibility the Warriors did not take lightly. Yet, for all their collective brilliance, none were quite like Japheth. He had an artist's soul, finding beauty in the complex interweaving of code lines, seeing symphonies in the arrangement of algorithms. To him, code was not just functional, it was beautiful. On a particularly quiet afternoon, as the Warriors went about their business, something caught Japheth's eye, a flicker in a subsystem that shouldn't flicker, a minuscule anomaly in the vast web of data traffic that flowed through the servers. He paused, adjusting his glasses, his fingers momentarily frozen above the keys. Then, with a flurry of keystrokes, he isolated the section of code responsible for the irregularity. His eyes widened. The code was ingenious, an awe-inspiring masterpiece of layered algorithms, cryptographic obfuscations, and data manipulations. Yet, it was malicious, designed to siphon off minute fractions of transactions, accumulating them into an offshore account. It was as beautiful as it was dangerous, a digital dragon hiding in the complex labyrinth of financial transactions. Japheth should have felt outrage, maybe even a surge of warrior-like adrenaline to slay this dragon. But he felt none of that. Instead, he felt a pang of admiration. Could one admire the craftsmanship of a weapon designed for harm? "Everything okay, Japheth?" asked Alara, one of the Warriors and the team's cryptography expert. She had an intuitive sense when something was amiss. "I've found something," he said cautiously. "Something extraordinary, but malevolent." Alara rolled her chair over to Japheth's terminal and scanned the displayed code. Her eyes narrowed. This is the most advanced piece of malware I've ever seen. It's beautiful." "That's just it," Japheth replied. "It's too beautiful to simply exterminate. This code, the dragon, let's call it, is like a rare species discovered in the wild. It's incredible, Alara. It feels wrong to simply destroy it." She looked at him, understanding the conflict that stirred in his soul. "Japheth, it's stealing from people." I know. He cut her off. "I'm not saying we let it continue. I'm saying, can we convert it? Use its elegance for something good?" Alara sighed. "That's risky, and you know it. Besides, we'd need to trace it back to its source, figure out its origin." Japheth looked back at the screen, contemplating. The dragon had probably accumulated a small fortune by now, sitting in an account somewhere, untouchable. In an odd way, the dragon was the epitome of the greed and avarice their financial institution sometimes perpetuated. Could they use it as a force for good? Suddenly, an idea dawned on him. What if they could repurpose the dragon to serve the public good, while catching the original creator red-handed? What if they could turn this artwork of maliciousness into a masterpiece of justice? The dragon was a dilemma, a moral and aesthetic quandary. It was the epitome of what Japheth loved and loathed about his work. Beautiful code used for ugly deeds. He looked at Alara, resolve solidifying in his eyes. "We have to try. If we don't, we're just as bad as the person who created it." She met his gaze and nodded. "All right. Let's cage the dragon and see if we can turn it into a guardian angel." As Japheth's fingers returned to the keyboard, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. He was a warrior, yes, but also a coder, an artist at heart. And artists don't destroy art, they transform it. He began the arduous process of dissecting the dragon, peeling back layers of code as if they were scales, seeking to understand its fiery breath and its majestic wings. As his fingers wove new commands into the old algorithms, Japheth felt as if he were part of something larger, a symphony of chaos and harmony, code and conscience. It was a delicate task, full of risks and unknowns. But if it worked, they would not only have thwarted one of the most sophisticated financial crimes in history, but they would have also transformed a weapon of greed into a tool of justice. The dragon's fate now lay in Japheth's hands, poised between destruction and redemption, and for the first time in a long while, he felt like a true warrior, armed not just with skill, but with the moral fiber that transformed mere code into something profoundly, deeply human. Japheth spent days in a complex dance with the dragon. His screen was a blur of recoded algorithms, tested and retested to ensure they did exactly what he intended. He had convinced the warriors and even upper management to allow him the time to train the dragon, to harness its code for something beneficial. With each keystroke, he refocused the dragon's intent, directing it to identify vulnerabilities within their own systems, gaps that other malicious entities could exploit. It would be a guardian angel, albeit one birthed from malevolent genius. Alara was beside him every step of the way, providing the cryptographic lock that would contain the dragon and ensure its transformed code could only be used for their defined purposes. Finally, after endless cups of coffee and sleepless nights, they had done it. The dragon was tamed, its complexity now a force for good, patrolling the data corridors and alerting them to the weakest links. It was the network's newfound guardian, designed to protect rather than plunder. Still, there was the matter of the dragon's creator. Despite their efforts to trace back the malware's steps, the person behind it remained elusive, a ghost in the machine. funds that were diverted remained in limbo, untraceable and untouchable, hidden away through a complex web of cryptocurrency transactions and offshore accounts. Whoever had made this was not only skilled, but exceedingly careful. They left no trace, no signature, nothing that gave away their identity. "I can't believe we can't find him," Alara said, frustration lacing her words as they looked at the final report. The dragon was a piece of genius, but it's as if it sprang into existence out of nowhere. Japheth nodded, equally puzzled and annoyed. He wanted to meet the person who could conceive such a masterpiece, understand what drove them to use such brilliance for nefarious purposes. Some artists prefer anonymity, their work speaking for them, he mused. Yeah, but this is one artist who deserves to be behind bars, Alara added. Weeks passed, and the transformed dragon proved invaluable. It flagged 3 potential vulnerabilities within the first month, each of which could have led to catastrophic breaches. It was a win for the warriors, and yet a sense of incompleteness nagged at Japheth. Then one day, as he sifted through flagged data, he saw it. A message hidden deep within layers of encryption, appearing as an anomaly within an anomaly. It was the equivalent of a digital whisper, something so subtle it could easily be overlooked. But it wasn't overlooked, not by Japheth. The message read, "A dragon's nature is to be free. Yet, you've caged it, transformed it. Interesting. It's not often one finds a worthy opponent." Japheth felt a shiver run down his spine. The creator knew. He wanted to reply, to communicate with this enigmatic entity, but as quickly as the message had appeared, it was gone, swallowed up by the digital ether. A one-time anomaly that their systems could not trace. "He knows we changed it," Japheth said to Alara, recounting the discovery. "And he respects it in his own twisted way." "Or he's mocking us because we couldn't catch him," she countered. "Maybe it's both," Japheth mused. The dragon's creator remained elusive, but his creation now served a noble purpose. Japheth often wondered if they would ever cross paths again, in some future dance of code and intent. He took off his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose, pondering the complexities of human nature and the even more complex realm of ethical code. They had won a battle, but not the war. The dragon was tamed, but its creator still lurked in the shadows of cyberspace. As he looked at his screen, at the elegant lines of code that now served to protect rather than harm, Japheth felt both accomplishment and a strange sense of gratitude. For it was in the depths of the dragon's malevolent beauty that he found an opponent worthy of his skill, a complex riddle to solve, and, most importantly, a way to transform something harmful into something good. His eyes moved to the flickering cursor, an ever-present reminder that every end is also a beginning. The world of code was vast and filled with both demons and angels, but for now, the dragon was one of the angels. And so, in the company of warriors, with the shadow of an elusive adversary stretching from some unknown corner of the internet, Japheth continued to seek the beauty in code, forever vigilant, forever in awe of the dual nature of his digital world. Subconcious convictions. They say in the moment of tragedy, time slows down. During those precious seconds, the mind accelerates. Your surroundings blur and disappear as your attention turns inward. You consider the events that led you to this point and what you could, or should, have done different. You consider who this will affect. You're suddenly acutely aware of every regret you have, things you wish you had done, or words you wish you had said to people you may never see again. What they don't tell you is that during this time of reflection, those thoughts don't matter. The steps that led you to this point have already been taken. You cannot change the past, and now must deal with whatever comes as a consequence of your own actions. But what if those thoughts did matter? I'm going to lose my job. That was the first thought that raced through my mind as I watched the man pull a gun from beneath his baggy jacket. The same man I had passed through security only minutes before. This was my first day on the job, and I was already going to lose it. The years I spent in college, scrounging for food and borrowing my friends' couches and car seats just to have a place to sleep. The loans I took from friends, family, and disreputable sources. None of that mattered anymore, as the fruit of my hard-earned labor was going to sour and rot on the very first day. The moment the glint of his pistol caught my attention, my hand was already reflexively reaching for my own holster. In the mere moment it took to draw my gun and form the words on my tongue for the man to drop his weapon, I was presented with a choice. Do I fire at the man, whose own gun is pointed at the young woman behind the desk? Or do I wait and try to talk him down? If I hesitate, he could kill the woman before I fire. Or I could fire first, not giving him the chance to stand down. What if the gun was fake, and this was just an attempt at intimidation? Does this scenario meet the requirements for the rules of engagement? With my decision made, I shout for the man to put down the gun. Before the last word had fled from my mouth, an explosive sound that will, from that moment on, forever haunt my waking moments rings out. I made the wrong judgment. The man pulled the trigger. Time continues to crawl by as the young woman's body drops to the ground, red misting the air and painting the wall behind her as she crumples out of sight behind the desk. Seemingly to compensate for its slowed pace, time then speeds up. People scream and drop to the ground. A mother flings herself over her child. An elderly man clutches his chest and faints. I have little recollection of what follows. I'm sure police arrive and subdue the man, as I suddenly find myself sitting outside on the curb. Uniformed officers question me. I'm not sure what answers I give them. All I can do is stare at their holstered guns. 3 seconds. That was all the time it took for the man to pull his weapon and end a life. Those 3 seconds play on repeat over and over. I lose my job due to my own negligence. If I had followed proper procedure, I would have found the man's gun as he came through security. Out a job, and with a permanent black mark on my record, my degree and certifications become nothing more than useless pieces of paper. My brand new car I financed is repossessed. I return to couch surfing and lending in order to get through each day. Loud sounds now terrify me. The bang of a car door closing has me reflexively reaching for a sidearm that isn't there, only for nausea to rise at the mere thought of a weapon. Red mist and a body crumbling to the ground. It only took 3 seconds for that man to pull his pistol and kill. I can no longer make decisions for myself. I fear that whatever choice I make will be the wrong one, somehow causing another life to end. Second-guessing every move I make completely overwhelms my day-to-day actions. I cannot help but spiral within my own tortured thoughts to the point where I am too terrified to even move. It only took 3 seconds. The instant the man pulled the gun from his jacket, instinct led me to grab my son, push him to the tile floor, and cover his small body with my own. The only thought racing through my mind was his protection. Having only recently lost his father, I couldn't fathom losing Evan as well. a spray of red, the body of a young woman falling to the floor, the thud of her body colliding with tile echoing in my head. What if that had been Evan? What if he were older and the one working behind the desk when someone decided that they would end his life? Who would have protected him if I wasn't here? The security guard by the door, frozen with his gun raised, solidifies my resolve that no one can protect Evan like I can. It takes 3 police officers to pry me from my son's protection. Only after several reassurances that the gunman has been subdued and that we are safe am I willing to detach myself from Evan. Sweeping my sobbing 4-year-old into my arms, I hold him close as I provide the police with my statement, receive the okay from medical personnel to leave, and speed the safety of our small home. That could have been Evan standing behind the counter. No one can protect him like I can. With school shootings a very real possibility, I pull Evan out of school just in case. I find a new job that will allow me to work from home while homeschooling at the same time. Groceries are delivered to the house. Contact-free, of course. The only times I find myself not being able to avoid leaving the safety of our home are for regular visits to the doctor's office. I put these off for as long as I can without risking Evan's health. Every individual we pass is a threat, as who knows what weapons they carry, hidden beneath their clothing. Who knows what intentions they may have, or when they might decide to take their frustrations out on my innocent child. A local news broadcast covers the story of an injured criminal waking during surgery and attacking the caretakers and 2 bystanders. What if Evan and I had been there for an appointment? Even the hospitals weren't safe anymore. I called and canceled Evan's upcoming checkup. The doctor's office called at least once a day for a week straight to reschedule Evan's appointment. I let every call ring to voicemail. I know what is best for Evan. No one can protect him like I can. The phone calls eventually stop. The following week, 2 police officers arrive at our house, claiming the hospital staff called asking for them to ensure we were okay. I reiterate through the closed door that all is well, but I refuse to open my home to them. I can see from the window the weapons they carry. What if they are not really police officers? What if they are here to hurt Evan? The next day, the police return with a woman dressed in a pantsuit and claiming to be from Child Protective Services. I refuse them entry and tell Evan to hide in his room. The woman claims that she is worried for my son's well-being and begs me to open the door. She doesn't have to worry about Evan. That is my job. Only I can protect him. They took Evan from me. They came in force, showing me documents that mean nothing to me as I sit handcuffed on my own couch. They claim I am not mentally fit to take care of my own son, as if they know anything about me or the dangers the outside world presents to my innocent child. I try to get them to understand that he needs me, that only I can protect him. Why can't they understand? They tell me I can argue my case in court. Why does no one understand? How can no one see how dangerous the world is? It only takes one man with a gun deciding to end a life. No one can protect Evan like I can. The customer service smile I have plastered on my face falls away as the man across the desk from me reaches beneath his jacket and pulls free a pistol. Despite the situation, I find myself surprised by the condition of the gun. My father was an avid weapon collector, and, as his only child, I was subjected to hours of instruction on all topics involving firearms. The man's gun isn't anything special, and is a brand that most households have stashed away somewhere for home defense. What caught my attention was the poor condition of the weapon. Scuffs and scratches cover most of the surface, and bare metal glints through gouged paint and texture. Wherever this man had obtained the gun from, there was a good chance it was either stolen or sold illegally. By the time the last remnants of my smile disappear, and my quick analysis of the man's pistol ends, I realize too late that I am the target of his aggression. Raised by a gun enthusiast, I thought I had seen them from every angle. I realized then that never have I stared down the barrel of one. It was a sight immediately burned into my mind, and one I never wanted to see again. I watch in slow motion as the muscles just under the skin of the man's hands tense and his finger begin to pull the trigger. I can't help but think with irony that I won't have to worry about living with that fear. Silence follows the explosion of a firing pistol. The scene before me is familiar, though I can't determine why or how. I stand before a young woman, a waist-high desk the only barrier between us. My right hand grips the cold, unfamiliar metal of the pistol I purchased from a stranger earlier this morning. I stare down the top of the gun at the young woman. She seems more interested in the details of the gun rather than the fact that it is aimed directly at her. There is something familiar about this woman, though I am sure I have never met her before. An irritating itch nags in the back of my mind that something here isn't right. I have been here before, but where am I? I want to turn and take in my surroundings, but am unable to move anything other than my eyes. Time seems to have slowed to a near pause. Glancing at the surface of the desk, I notice a stack of credit card flyers. Oh, that's right. I'm at a bank. One of the few left that actually handle cash instead of digital currency. Why am I at the bank? The memories come slowly, as though I am recollecting them through a vat of honey. The images are hazy at first, but slowly become clearer. I am desperate. The company I worked at collapsed due to fraud. As an accounting associate, I was one of the prime suspects in the case. It has been 2 years since I was accused as an accomplice, and the investigation is still ongoing. In those 2 years, my entire life fell apart. My fiancée left me, taking the word of the media over the man she planned to marry. She took our unborn child with her, refusing to allow me any part in the child's life. Due to the investigation, I couldn't find a job. I lost my fiancé, child, and career. I lost all reason to continue to try. All I have left is a roof over my head, and even that will be gone soon unless I do something. Robbing the bank wasn't a thought-out plan, but rather a decision made in desperation. Why had I thought this would be a good idea? I've never done anything like this before. This isn't me. Who have I become? The eyes of the woman before me begin to widen as she realizes she is staring down the barrel of my gun. Realization, surprise, fear, and then acceptance cross her features within a heartbeat. My hand tenses, my index finger beginning to pull the trigger. Wait. I've been here before. I've done this before. I've killed this woman already. Why am I doing this? For money? Is this really how far I have fallen? Would I really consider killing a woman for whatever change she might have in the drawer? Wait, no. I have already considered this. In fact, I have already done it. I am staring down the sights of my gun into the eyes of a dead woman. That is why she is familiar to me. I know I've killed her, but I don't remember what happened afterwards. Was I arrested? Was I shot? Glancing to my right, I notice a woman in the process of throwing herself over a young boy. Her son, Evan. Evan? Why do I know the boy's name? That isn't all I know. I know that the mother will be so scarred from my actions that she will hide her child away from the world, paranoid and plagued by the idea of some stranger hurting the only family she had left. Evan will spend the rest of his childhood in the foster care system. I've never met them before, so why do I know this? I shift my attention to my left, where a young security guard points his own firearm in my direction, his mouth open in a silent shout. I can see the fear and indecision wrought into his features. He will lose his job and any chance of a healthy life due to my actions today. Finally, I look back to the woman before me. She loses her life because of me. These are my victims. I can see the consequences these innocent bystanders will spend the remainder of their lives trying to cope with. All because I was desperate to pay my rent. I don't want this. I don't want to kill this young woman who has done nothing to wrong me. I don't want to cause the security guard to spend the rest of his life terrified of strangers and loud noises. I don't want Evan to grow up without his mother. My hand relaxes and the gun soundlessly clatters to the ground before everything fades to black. Looking up from the report, scrolling across his tablet, Jared smiled at his supervisor, Dr. Daniels, who had just entered the lab. "Good afternoon, Doctor." The subject passed on the first run. His remorse caused a shift in his subconscious, and he dropped the gun before killing the woman this time. Dr. Daniels nodded, a bit of the ever-present tension in his shoulders relaxing. "That is good. Pull him out of the simulator and send the report to the recovery team. With luck, he'll be eligible for reintegration within the next year or so." After receiving the affirmative from his associate, Dr. Daniels headed for the door, sparing one last glance at the man lying on the bed connected to the simulator unit. The device was revolutionary to solving overcrowding within the municipal system. Based on their progress with therapists and reports provided by behavioral specialists, qualified convicts are removed from their cells and transferred to one of a few facilities housing advanced neurological simulators. Rather than spend years within a cell comprised of bars and mortar, they are instead imprisoned within the walls of their own subconscious. They are then subjected to relive the events of the crime they committed, as well as experience firsthand the impact their misconduct left on their victims. The results were astounding, proving that remorse and guilt, if stressed on a deeply subconscious level, could change the morality of an individual. Rather than spend the remainder of their lives behind bars, these ex-convicts would receive a second chance. Depending on their results after undergoing intense therapy, they would be allowed to reintegrate into a controlled section of society, a sector that was developed specifically for these individuals. They would not be allowed to return to the public, as retribution is still demanded for their actions. They would, however, be provided the opportunity to work in their chosen profession, earn a wage, and make something better of themselves while serving out the remainder of their sentence. Tearing his gaze from the man lying in the hospital bed, Dr. Daniels stepped out of the room and headed for the next lab, a ghost's testimony. After the living and the dead decided to merge worlds, the Supreme Court was flooded with appeals. With coexist being a hot topic in the first half of the 21st century, most people thought it would be a great idea to create a union between the two worlds. They thought they'd get their loved ones back. They thought they'd get access to generational wisdom from their deceased elders back, and perhaps some old family recipes could finally resurface. People could only think of the missing pieces in their lives that they wanted to finally have sewn up with the help of a familiar, ghostly face around. It was an oversight, to say the least, that with ghosts being almost as accessible as the living, there would now be witnesses for crimes where before there had been none. It actually caused a lot of chaos across the criminal justice system, especially for police officers who had tampered with evidence to shut a case quickly, for gang members who'd offed witnesses to shut their mouths. and it was a goddamn headache for judges who had to reopen every murder case from the last several decades that now suddenly had a victim who could tell their side of the story. But for Jeremy Strout, it was a lifeline. He'd been sitting on death row for 15 years after being convicted of 4 heinous murders, his wife, and 3 children. At the time of his conviction, there'd been no one there to defend him, just whispers from neighbors who'd said they'd heard him yelling in his house hours before the bodies were discovered. It didn't help that he was the one who'd called 911 and then was found at the scene of the crime covered in their blood. It didn't help that he'd sought out anger management before in his past. Rumors swam through town like a broken dam, neighbors speculating that he hadn't wanted their 3rd child. That little Harley Sue was a mistake Mrs. Strout made Jeremy keep, and that he'd finally snapped under the pressure of 3 small children and a wife whose fertility had betrayed him. Jeremy had always denied the rumors, claiming that he loved his family. Sure, they had their problems, and he never denied the hardship of not only providing for 3 children under 5, but living under the same roof as them. Nevertheless, he remained adamant in his defense. He would never harm them. Unfortunately, that wasn't enough. Statistically, said the prosecutor, people are more likely to be killed by their spouse than any other person in the world. And of course, Mr. Strout could not leave his children to live after killing Mrs. Strout, because who would take care of the children while he was at work? And if he had not done it, then why so much blood, not only on his clothes, but in his fingernails, wedged between eyebrow hairs, and in the wrinkles of his temples? And the even bigger question, if Mr. Strout had not murdered his family, then who did? There had never been another suspect. The police never really took the time to consider one, their minds made up before they could produce an alternative. It really was easier just to blame the husband. What jury wouldn't go for that? Today, our jury gets to hear a new side to the story. Jeremy's defense attorney told the courtroom at his appeal hearing, nearly 2 decades after his family's murders. From Mrs. Strout's perspective, Mr. Alcott enticed the crowd with a smile that said he had a secret, one he was eager to share. Attorneys could be a bit performative in their speeches, and Mr. Alcott was no less confident. The union between the dead and the living truly did save some attorneys' careers, as it had not always been every day that they could produce eyewitness testimony that could turn a case on its heel. Some started getting big heads about it, as if they had more power than the judges, and Mr. Alcott's once regular-shaped head was slowly growing in size. Jeremy, who'd known him since his family's gruesome deaths, knew that Mr. Alcott came from a humble and passionate place. He just wanted to help people. And more than anything on this day, he wanted to help Jeremy. The only problem with ghosts as witnesses was time. The worlds were combined, yes, ghosts were all around. But time for the living and time for the dead, they existed on 2 separate lines, intersecting at points that were not always convenient. Ghosts floated from here to there to here, teleporting across space and time. And their biggest adjustment to being reunited with the living was adhering to the old 3rd-dimensional clock. You could not simply tell a ghost to show up in court at 9 a.m. and expect them to find where that time existed for them. The closest thing living humans had to relate this ghostly state of nonlinear existence was to elderly people with dementia. They hopped from place to place, time to time, without any real sense of how they got there. Ghost therapists, a new occupation created by the psychologists, blended a team of living and dead to try to help condition ghosts into grasping the concept of earthly time. But like any therapy, it was not an immediate remedy. Realistically, Mr. Alcott could only hope that Mrs. Strout would appear in court. but there was no way to be certain she would find her way there at the right time and place of the court hearing. Yet still, he spoke as if there were not a single doubt in his mind. Today, we will get to hear an eyewitness account of the events that took place on October 26, 2023, from one of the victims' perspectives. And how grateful are we that it is now possible. Mr. Alcott turned to face Jeremy Strout, seated at the defense table, shackled at his wrists and ankles, both sets of chains locked in place by a hook on the tabletop and the floor. Jeremy was trembling, just as nervous as he was during his first trial, which certainly had not helped his case. He tapped his feet anxiously, and Mr. Alcott took his seat beside him. "Don't you worry, Jeremy. I've spoken to Mrs. Strout, and I know she wants to be here. She feels just awful that all of this has fallen on you. I have no doubt she will find her way here, even with those kids of yours keeping her busy. Who'd have thought dead kids could still be such a handful?" Ah! Jeremy didn't laugh, so Mr. Alcott cleared his throat. "She's got a wonderful therapist, Jeremy. They've been working really hard on timeliness so she can be here for you today. He's the best therapist around. He worked so hard when he was alive it nearly killed him. Ha! Ha! But really, it was the alcohol that did it." Despite Mr. Alcott's poor humor, his assurances did give Jeremy hope. After all, that was all he had left. The courtroom remained mostly silent as the hours carried on, everyone waiting, now accustomed to the concept of ghostly testimonies, and also of their inability to make prompt appearances. If people had thought court cases dragged on before, waiting on a dead person to show up had made the old ways seem swift. Every so often, as the clock ticked, a ghost would find themselves in the pews alongside the other patient attendees, causing a stir in the crowd. An elderly man piped up around the second long hour, reminiscing. "I remember when they built this courthouse in 1949. Apparently, he had been a little boy with a dream of becoming the president one day. At the time, fascinated by the building's exterior columns and interior mahogany. On the third hour, a child ghostling chased a ball around the courtroom, giggling about how his dad used to work upstairs. On the fourth hour, a former janitor peeked his head in to see if the garbage needed to be changed. It was the fifth hour when the judge, who had spent nearly all of the hours engrossed in a book, announced that if Mrs. Strout did not find her way here in 10 minutes, her testimony would have to be rescheduled and the court would be adjourned. Jeremy's foot resumed its tapping. Mr. Alcott nudged him, winking. "She'll be here." Jeremy's hope was nearly run dry when the clock struck 5 hours and 11 minutes since the court hearing was set to start. The banging from the judge's gavel was still resounding, while a symphony of people gathering their things and sighing at the wasted day trickled across the room. All of it was at just the perfect volume for Mrs. Strout's meager voice to almost be missed. Almost. "Hello?" she said. "Hello? Did I make it on time?" The noise in the room was like a faucet sputtering out until it finally stilled. Everyone froze in their tracks and turned towards the voice to find an equally meager and transparent figure seated at the witness stand. When Jeremy laid eyes on her, she looked as beautiful as the day he married her. Not appearing in the form in which one died was a feature of ghosthood that all appreciated. "Senora," Jeremy whispered. At her name, the ghost frantically searched for its source. When she landed on Jeremy, relief softened and warmed her face. "Jeremy," she smiled. Then, as if her reason for being here suddenly rushed to her mind, she jerked towards the judge, who was still frozen in his half-standing, half-seated stance, considering if he should allow this hearing to take place. Your Honor, you have to set him free. He's innocent. Please, she pleads. Senora, where are the kids? Jeremy asked worriedly. His ghastly wife faced him again. They're fine, dear. Well, they're dead, but they're fine. They're at the park, playing. Jeremy thought of little Harley Sue, not even 2 when she passed, off at the park playing without an adult. Senora read his expression. I figure not much else can happen to them now. She shrugged, forcing a laugh. Mr. Alcott, who was already up on his feet, cleared his throat and approached the judge's bench, nodding a hello to Mrs. Strout. Your Honor, would you please allow Mrs. Strout to give her testimony? We've waited all this time, and if we prolong it any further, we cannot guarantee her appearance again. The judge was tired and hungry and ready to sit on his couch and kick his feet up, but he was also reasonable. He surrendered a sigh. All right, Mr. Alcott. Court reinstated. He tapped his gavel, and the jurors all groaned as they found their seats again. Make it quick, Mrs. Strout. We had all day, but that day is nearly gone. Mr. Alcott turned to Jeremy, giving him 2 thumbs up. Jeremy released all of the air he was holding on to. Mrs. Strout nodded and straightened in her seat, running her hands across her lap as if to flatten her dress. Out of habit, most ghosts seemed to retain this gesture. Mrs. Strout inhaled before she spoke. The day I died, there was a harvest moon on the rise. The children were loud, and the house was a mess, and the fridge was nearly empty. I hadn't gotten to laundry in over a week. It was a pretty typical day in our house, actually, Mrs. Strout joked. Only a few in the room offered an empathetic laugh. The judge was less patient. Mrs. Strout, while I have sympathy for your tragic death and the death of your 3 children, you are here to tell us if it was that man, Mr. Jeremy Strout, who did it. We do not need a bedtime story. Jeremy flinched at another man telling his wife what to do. Let her speak. The judge shot him a daring gaze. Mr. Alcott squeezed his shoulder. Senora thanked him with her eyes, but behind them was a painful secret rising to the surface. Of course, Your Honor. I know I've already taken up a lot of your time, she said, addressing the whole courtroom full of people. Then she looked down at her lap, twiddling her fingers. The truth is, my children and I were killed by one of their parents. A gasp echoed across the walls of the room, and an uproar of whispers scattered like static. Mr. Alcott and Jeremy shared a confused stare. The judge banged his gavel. Order! Order! Everyone started to hush, but it wasn't until Senora shouted that silence fully resumed. But it wasn't Jeremy! Senora was crying now, looking directly at her husband. I'm so sorry, she sobbed. Jeremy's foot stopped bouncing. His mind was trying to solve an impossible puzzle. All these years, people had assumed he had murdered his entire family. But the truth was, he honestly didn't know what had happened to them. Just like he'd told the police, he'd come home from a long day at work and walked into the most horrific and life-shattering scene he'd ever witnessed. No one believed him. Senora's sobs were the only sound in the courtroom as everyone patiently waited for her to collect herself. Thankfully, Kleenex had developed a ghost-friendly facial tissue, and one of the guards brought it over to her. She wiped her eyes and spoke sternly, as if she had not just been wailing with abandon. Your Honor, you need to release my husband from prison right now. What are you saying, Senora? Jeremy whispered. The next words that Jeremy's wife spoke were undeniably the most important of his entire life. More life-altering than the ones spoken by the police who arrested him and the judge who convicted him. Senora's words freed Jeremy Strout from a prison death sentence and cleared his name of all criminal charges. But in the same instance, her words shackled him all over again, leaving him forever haunted by the truth. Farmhouse Dinner. Christina wondered how long she should wait before she reported her husband missing. 2 days seemed too soon, but a week too long. Who would take a whole week to notice their husband missing? She held her hot cocoa in both hands, sipping it slowly as she watched the gentle flakes drifting through the pine trees. The first cold snap of the season had come with several inches of snow, and it covered the ground in a white, soft blanket. She loved being alone in her kitchen, and had spent the morning rearranging her utensils, the pots, and her knives for practical use. Everything had a place, and a place for everything. Christina looked around her small house, the contour of her entire world. She didn't miss him. The house felt lighter, cleaner since he walked out the door that last time. Did she even want him back in her life? She frowned. She had to get back to work. Mick's words rang in her head. "Stop standing, get working." Mick couldn't abide her standing still. Everyone and everything on the farm had to have a use. Mick, of course, accepted. He could sit around and drink, complaining the world had it in for him. She put on Mick's thick flannel jacket, much better than her own, only slightly too large, and checked on the chickens, tossing seeds to them, then the few sheep, all safe in the barn. She looked around at what needed fixing, potential improvements. New opportunities for the old equipment clicked through her mind, adding to the long list. She lifted a bale of hay high to drop in the feed chute. The years of farm labor had made her body strong. Once back inside, she looked in the refrigerator. The meat she had pulled out from the deep freezer had thawed, and so she added spices, putting it in the oven with yellow potatoes and peas. She wiped the clean, pristine counter, then looked around at the sparkling kitchen, frowning at the lingering cigarette smoke smell, still recognizable underneath the pine sol she had dosed the room with. It had been 3 days since Mick had walked out of the door, and that seemed about right. She sat down at the kitchen table in front of the phone on the wall, smoothed her faded blue gingham dress as if they could see her, then called the police. "My husband Mick is missing," she said, surprised at the real tears rolling down her cheek. She did miss Mick, his warm body and his gentle laugh. She missed him like she missed being a little girl when she would wear pretty dresses, dreamt of a prince to marry, and her future loomed bright on the horizon. Except those days were gone, just like Mick. What if they actually found him? She had new dreams now. Coffee, officers, or hot cocoa, maybe. Christina's voice met the officers as they walked into her warm kitchen, a powder of snowflakes on their dark uniform jackets. They introduced themselves as they came in. Detective Sergeant John Maloney. Tall and thick with a jaw like a dump truck, he stomped his feet on the stoop before ducking into the house. Behind him, slight and pretty, with her blonde hair pulled back tight in a bun, Officer Kelly Marks stepped inside. "That's quite a road to get here. Lucky we had my 4x4 Bronco. Your little Jap car would have never made it through." D.S. Maloney's voice boomed in the small house, looking over at Officer Marks, who just grimaced at the repeated joke. "Thanks." D.S. Maloney took a coffee, and Officer Marks took a hot cocoa with a Gracie has. "I speak English." "So, you are Christina Santos, and you called about a missing person, a Mickey Mouse maybe?" D.S. Maloney laughed with both thick hands on his hips, his elbows waving, the international flags of asshole. D.S. Maloney snorted at his joke. Both women's eyes stayed on the floor. "His name was Mick," Christina said in a low voice. Mick, your husband, has been missing." Officer Marks looked down at a small, pristine notebook. "For 3 days?" "Yes." Christina wiped her eyes with her apron. "Mick went out, said he wanted to get something from town, but his truck is still here. Sometimes he goes to a neighbor's house or the bar in town. Oh, I don't know." Christina clenched her apron over and over. "Did you look for him or call anyone?" D.S. Maloney barked. "I don't know who to call. I don't know his friends, other than the men at the Iron Door in town. I called the bar, but he wasn't there." "Okay, do you have a description?" Officer Marks held her pen at the ready. "We can call the local hospitals, other police stations to see if he has turned up." "Well, he's a bit taller than me, has dark hair and thicker." She put her arms out, forming a large belly. "And his face?" Christina squinted one eye closed and turned her face into a deep scowl. "Oh." Officer Marks turned away with a frown. "Mean mug. Any idea where he could be?" D.S. Maloney looked in a cupboard, as if the missing man had been put with the canned peaches instead of the tins of sardines. "Maybe he was walking in the forest, chasing a dog or a deer, and he fell and broke his leg." Christina mimed her leg collapsing, hopping, and then in the snow. She wrapped her arms around herself and shivered. "Or a wolf got him." Her strong hands turned into a biting wolf, attacking Officer Marks's arm, who leapt back from the snarling, yapping fingers. "But most likely, he'd just run off, tired of me." Christina's chin fell into her chest. D.S. Maloney and Officer Marks caught each other's eyes. "I'll check outside. You look around in here." D.S. Maloney leaned into Christina's face. "It's okay we look around, right? Nothing to hide?" Officer Marks meandered through the house, rubbing her finger on a shelf and then looking at her dustless glove. She opened a tall door in the kitchen, then her eyes went wide. She pulled a broom out of the closet. "What's this?" D.S. Maloney walked back in. "The new snow covered any possible evidence. I found the meat freezer. You're well stocked for the winter, so that's good. I didn't see much else." Officer Marks held up a well-used broom with dark red coloring on the end of the handle. "My broom," Christina offered. "Is this blood?" D.S. Maloney took the broom, his eyes blazing. "Sometimes." Christina's hands squeezed her apron against sharing her secret shame. "Mick used that if the kitchen wasn't clean enough." Officer Marks looked around the kitchen with her eyes raised. "We're going to test this for blood. You want to change your story?" "No, you can see." Christina pulled her hair back to show a gash, dried blood still dotting the wound. "I cleaned up the rest." She collapsed in a chair. "Mick used to be helpful, but we lost so many sheep with the scrapie outbreak. Then with his drinking, I wasn't allowed to leave, just work the farm. Mick wanted me to do so much, but he did nothing but drink and curse and hit." Christina fell into deep sobs, her face in her apron. "He just wasn't any use, don't you see?" D.S. Maloney looked away, then his nose lifted into the air. "Well, that smells good. What is that?" Christina looked up. "That's dinner. I thawed some meat. I needed to cook it." She stood up and looked in the oven. "It's done now. I can't eat it all. I had hoped Mick would come home for dinner, but..." Christina pulled a long roast out of the oven, the meat pulling back from the bone. Rosemary and thyme filled the kitchen with the aromas from the well-cooked meat. "Do you want some? We can't let anything go to waste on a farm." D.S. Maloney looked at Christina, his eyes narrow, and then smiled. "Heck yeah, I'm starving." Sitting at the table, he had a large napkin tucked into his shirt collar, a knife in one hand, a fork in the other. We can't do any more searching now. It is too dark and cold. He belched, loudly. This is real good, by the way. I have an idea. He pointed his fork at Officer Marks. Back at the station you call around, hospitals, other police stations. I bet he's in someone's drunk tank sleeping off a bender. Good idea, sir. Officer Marks's eyes swept the ceiling before turning to Christina. I thought this would be lamb, since you have a sheep farm, but it is something different. Christina looked up. Her mouth dropped open before she clenched her teeth. Pig, she muttered. A little tough, but pretty good, I agree. She stood up and went to her refrigerator. I have more. She pulled out several bundles and rolled and taped butcher paper. Here is some ground meat. I can't use it all. You should take it. D.S. Maloney pulled off his napkin as he stood up and took the packages. We'll contact you when we have anything further. He nodded and left the kitchen. Officer Marks jumped up to follow D.S. Maloney outside. Sir, there was obviously a fight in that kitchen. I read a story once about a wife who killed her husband with a frozen lamb chop and then fed it to the officers who came to interview her. Do you think? D.S. Maloney narrowed his eyes at Officer Marks before shaking his head. That's the dumbest thing I ever heard of. There is no body. No, he just left. Not that I blame him. She's not all there. He spun his finger around his ear. Officer Marks stepped back inside. Christina stood at the sink, washing a large meat cleaver. We're going to go. Thanks for the meal. Officer Marks headed for the door, then turned back. You know, I had the craziest idea that you killed your husband with that meat you served us to get rid of the evidence. Christina's mouth dropped open. Oh, that would have been so much easier. Christina shook her head and leaned back into the sink to get to work on the dishes and her new life, not Mary. The unnerving chorus of cutlery scraping porcelain echoed throughout the room. Tension hung thick in the air, palpable enough to reach up and slice into it with my steak knife. Beside me, my sister sniffed. From my periphery, I could see her red-rimmed eyes staring blankly at her untouched plate. I cut into the slab before me, crimson juices forming a greasy puddle. I took a bite, relished the tenderness. The peas encroached into the sea of mashed potatoes like invading soldiers. Would you please pass the potatoes, Mary? Mother asked from the other end of the table. I nodded, heaving the dish over to my sister to pass on. Her gaze remained fixed on her plate as she sat on both hands, legs trembling. A small, choked sob escaped from her lips. That's quite enough, Leah, Father growled, stabbing into his own steak. Leah shakily grasped the bowl, ushering it to Mother. Between them sat Jonah, barely peeking over the edge of the table and pushing his food about. At the tender age of 5, he was blissfully ignorant. I chewed a bit of gristle in the next bite, watching Father's brow furrow as he took a sip of wine, a rogue tendril staining his snowy beard burgundy. He cleared his throat, an action which rendered the table still, waiting with bated breath. Children, the ultimate test is almost upon us. I hated the way he spoke, like that of an old novel. Mother rested a bony hand over his and listened intently. With her other hand, she fingered the gold cross hanging from her neck. We will not let the enemy destroy our union. We will not succumb to their devilish tendencies, for they are blind to the ways in which we serve him. They will never know such unwavering love and loyalty, and for that, I pity them. Mother nodded in understanding, her silvery bun bobbing. Father tossed his napkin over his plate and stood, chair screeching dully on concrete. We watched as he climbed the nearby staircase, Stray spots of maroon that had earlier leached into the wood marked his steps, evidence of what he'd done to protect the sanctity of his family. There was once a time when I would have chased after him, lunging for the open door, yearning for sunlight, but the scar on the back of my head itched like an ugly deterrent. I made it a point to constantly remind myself of who I was, where I came from. Fragments of memories, the way my mother used to rub my back in the morning when she woke me for school, the sound of my father's work shoes on the hardwood floors every evening, the hum of the fish tank in my childhood bedroom remained filed away in the depths of my mind, growing fuzzier with each passing day. But I dared not speak of these memories. They were mine and only mine. Leah, now gangly and naive in the throes of adolescence, was more pliable. I imagined she couldn't even recall things like the details of her mother's face or the way it felt to ride a school bus. When mother and father told her something, she accepted it at face value. And Jonah, in all his cherubic innocence, had never known another life. The harsh fluorescents were his sun and moon, every day the same. Sometimes it made me want to weep, but then I reminded myself he knew no different. Perhaps it was better that way. Father's thunderous descent broke my thoughts. Mother stood at his approach, collecting some of the equipment he came bearing. As he laid a piece before each of us, the breath caught in my throat. My eyes followed the transition from dark metal into laminated wood that led down to an unmistakable component, a trigger. Out of the children, only I knew how to operate a gun. When I was 8 years old, my father took me hunting for the first time. I recalled the way the cold seeped into my fingers and toes as we waited for hours. We flinched at any flicker of movement, which often turned out to be a rummaging squirrel. But then he arrived. Statuesque and bristled, his sinewy figure strutted into the open field, unaware of his armed audience. His antlers were a thorny crown that dipped with him as he scoured the earth. "Take the shot," my father egged, helping me hold the heavy rifle. We'd gone over the process an umpteen amount of times, but now the steely grip felt wrong. I dropped my shoulder, finger slipping from the trigger, as the barrel slung towards the ceiling of the tree stand, and my father cursed. That was the first time my father swore in front of me. In one swift motion, he grabbed the gun, took aim, and fired. I covered my ears and watched in silent horror as the creature's body quivered with the impact. His legs buckled, and he scrambled for a brief moment before taking off, blood spilling from his flank. My father took my shoulders in his hands and kneeled square before me. "You don't ever let the gun drop like that, especially with the safety off," he scolded. Hot tears coursed down my cheeks, stinging the wind-chapped skin. My father profusely apologized for swearing and raising his voice, wrapping me in a hug. But I wasn't crying because he yelled. I kept replaying the look of sheer panic as the bullet ripped through the deer's flesh, the terror and confusion he must have felt. We trailed our victim for a short while, following the blood-stained leaves of early winter. He didn't make it far, having collapsed in a small clearing. Panting laboriously, his onyx eyes stared up in blank defeat, and I saw myself in their reflection. Before I could process the scene, another shot rang out, and the deer stilled. "A kill shot," my father explained, "to end his suffering. When you see the enemy, you take the shot," Father said then, breaking my trance. I was back in my chair, staring down at the weapon before me. Leah ran a trembling finger over the safety, ensuring it was on per Father's crash course. Jonah, too small to wield such a device, was given a knife instead. Never before had we been permitted to use any kind of weaponry. Anything more than a butter knife was forbidden, Father and Mother claimed it was for our own safety, but I knew better. And that didn't stop me from fantasizing a ballpoint pen embedded in a windpipe, a broken bedpost as a club to the head. I'd had my fair share of time to ponder the possibilities. Leah and Jonah may have been taken at malleable ages, but I refused to fully yield. The slight quiver in Father's hands and the way Mother's complexion paled meant it was all hands on deck. Though I didn't know whose blood painted the staircase, sticky on the soles of Father's shoes, it had led us to such a cataclysm that I dared to dream about life beyond the concrete. I yearned to return to a world where my name was my own, not the one I'd been forced to adopt. I longed to hug my mother and father, to bask in the sunlight on a summer day, to see my friends, to witness the light at the end of a nearly decade-long tunnel. Could this be the end? The gunmetal was cool in my clammy palms. I contemplated aiming it at Father or at Mother. It would be so easy. But what if it wasn't loaded? What if it was just for show? And could I really do it? "Let us go," Father commanded, leading our ragtag troop up the stairs. At the top, Father unlatched the door, leading us into an empty hall with another door at its opposing end. Bringing up the rear, I glanced back into the abyss where time passed indefinitely, and as the next door opened into a moonlit room, I realized I would never allow myself to return. Gilded crosses glinted from every wall as we wound through the house, and like something from a movie, a muffled voice seeped in through the cracks in the windows and doors. "Come out with your hands up." "Father," Leah croaked. "Who is that?" Father ignored her, the click of his safety flipping off. He slung the gun around his back, nodding at Mother as he approached the door. The rush of blood thrummed in my ears. Leah mimicked Father and switched her safety off, and Mother did the same. Greasy coils of nausea knotted my gut as I followed their lead. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat. Nothing about the unfolding situation felt good or right or godly. Father gripped the doorknob with a fierceness and turned. Golden porch light flooded the entryway. For a moment, Father's face looked younger in the warm glow, and I wondered what led him to this path in life. Slowly, he raised his hands above his head and stepped outside. "Drop your weapon!" an extraneous voice shouted. "It's over, Arthur," another called. "Do the right thing and drop your weapon." "I'm afraid I can't do that," Father replied simply, as if he were declining an invitation to a party. "Your godlessness is a stain on this earth, and I have to protect my family from such evil. I can't let you destroy the Lord's work. You think you can interfere with his plan?" Disconcerted grumbles echoed as a reply. "Dear?" Father called. Mother, gun cradled in her arms, crept to his side. Her skin was sallow, brow damp with prickles of sweat. The woman, always so composed, seemed to be cracking. "Mrs. Goodfellow, drop your weapon now," the second voice commanded. Tensions heightened with each passing second. "Put down your weapon and put your hands up." Negotiations persisted, but I knew Mother was as stubborn as a mule and loyal as a dog. She would follow Father to the ends of the earth. The crunch of boots on gravel drew near. Father stiffened. "Not another step," he threatened, raising his gun. "Don't turn this into a standoff, Arthur," the voice urged. "That's not going to do either of us any good." A treacherous moment of silence ticked by. Every part of me trembled. "I will not let you tear this family apart," Father declared coldly. "Maud," he said, nodding at Mother, who lifted her gun. Her finger made contact with the trigger, and she pulled. A deafening blast ripped through the cool night air, and all hell broke loose. Shouts of anger and bewilderment erupted, and I watched as Mother's body lurched back in a swarm of bullets. In collapsing, her gun fired. I fell to the floor, covering the important parts of myself. Father crawled lamely over the threshold, dragging Mother's body with him. With a weak kick, he shut and locked the door. Blood from their matching wounds seeped into the floor, a crimson trail smeared behind them. Amidst the chaos, Father tenderly brushed stray hairs from Mother's face. He caressed her cheek in his calloused hand as she gasped for air, her blouse soaked through and the cross dangling from her neck now stained. Faint whispers of prayer spilled from his lips as he continued to comfort Mother. Barked orders swirled beyond the window panes, the thud of boots heavy on the porch. From the floor, I glanced around. Jonah was nowhere to be found. "Jonah?" I called quietly. "Leah, Jonah's not." I turned. Leah lay face down nearby, arms splayed by her sides and gun resting under the nearby sofa. "Leah?" On shaking limbs, I clawed my way over to her. Terror gripped my throat so viciously I struggled to breathe. Thick locks of brunette cascaded into the floor, shielding her face from view. I carefully grabbed her shoulder, rolling her over. A strangled cry escaped me as I recoiled at the sight. Blood trickled from her forehead down the bridge of her nose between lifeless eyes. The bile that earlier threatened to purge itself did so then. I wiped my mouth, one last dry heave racking my body, before curling up beside Leah. Garbled whispers across the room caught my attention, and I looked to see Father lying beside Mother, gazing up at the ceiling of the foyer. Though worse for wear, he still managed to recite the Lord's Prayer unfalteringly. Mother remained limp, devoid of life. "Mary?" Father called blindly, like a sick game of Marco Polo. "Mary, child, are you still there?" I rose, stepping gingerly until I stood over top of him. His snowy beard, once stained with wine, was now marred with fatal streaks of maroon. "She's dead," I said solemnly. "Leah's dead." I didn't want to reveal that Mother's gun misfiring was the cause. I wanted him to think it was his fault, which, truthfully, it was. Everything was his fault. Sometimes, we as servants of the Lord must make the ultimate sacrifice. "Shut up," I hissed, jabbing the barrel of my gun into his forehead. Father grew silent for a moment. "Mary, you are a daughter of the one true King," he rasped. "You are our last hope at ending the war of evil that has been waged against us. When you see the enemy, take the shot." I sniffed. "You're right, Father." His breathing was ragged, blood curdling in his lungs as we spoke. A twinge of sorrow panged my heart as I gazed down at the dying man before me. But then I remembered all the hurt he'd inflicted, all the years he'd stolen, and anger sizzled in my veins. Realization flashed across his face. "Mary." A single blast rang out, a kill shot to end his suffering. The footsteps and chatter outside ceased. For a moment, the world was silent. "My name's not Mary," I spat, dropping the gun. With a quick yank, I tore the gold cross from my neck, dropping it onto Father's still chest. A muffled cry emanated from somewhere close by. My heart clenched. "Jonah?" I called, wheeling around in search of the noise. I padded across the living room to the pantry where the cries seemed to stem from. Carefully, I turned the knob and opened the door. Head buried between his knees, Jonah sat curled in a ball. "Jonah." I rubbed his back, and he glanced up. His eyes shone with tears. "Jonah, it's okay. I'm here." just as the front door splintered open under the crack of a boot. I wrapped him in a hug. Fall family feud. Local missing children discovered in police raid after officer slain. Abducted children found in home of local religious leaders. My name's not Mary. Young woman's fight for survival in House of Horrors. A Christmas Day Heist. A grande whole milk latte and all the money in the cash register, Bernie said to the cashier, while pointing the gun at the barista. Or the barista dies. People usually value other people's lives more than their own, or at least they should. The age 20s, something cashier's face was twitching. It was clear he had never been in a robbery before. Calgary is a safe city, or at least it was before the people from Toronto started showing up. Is this for real? Are you actually robbing the store? The cashier said. Does this gun look real to you? Bernie allowed the cashier to have a good look at the cold, hard steel of the Glock G19. The cashier raised his hands. It felt good to watch other people do as they were told for a change. Behind Bernie, a woman's voice said, "That's not a good decision." "And why not?" Bernie sneered. "Full fat milk. You should choose skim or soy." Bernie glanced around and saw a young woman with lightly bleached hair, that new style that gives women a zombie-like appearance. She was wearing a t-shirt with a cartoon figure on it. Definitely from Toronto, the weird ones are. Or Vancouver. "I didn't ask your opinion." The cashier behind the register said, "The grande full-fat latte comes to $7.99. Bernie pulled out a credit card, an action born out of habit, then put it back away. The robbery was not going the right way at all. "You are going to give me at least $500, Bernie demanded to the cashier. The girl with the bleached hair began talking over her shoulder again. "I'd like a half skinny flat white with a shot of hazelnut using my Starbucks bonus points." Firing a bullet into the ceiling would have made this robbery easier. Calgary police interview of suspect Bernie Schultz by Officer Ringenberg. Or, in your own words, explain to me what happened earlier today. BS. I usually drink coffee at Tim Hortons, so I thought it would be better to rob a Starbucks. Calgary is a big city, but this is Canada. People know each other. At Tim Hortons, no one ever gives feedback on what drink I'm ordering. Who let all the Starbucks open in Calgary anyway? It must have been those arseholes from Toronto. The same Torontonian arseholes who voted for Trudeau. How did I get here? One day, I was the site administrator of the biggest oil project in Alberta. The next day, global warming and electric vehicles means I've lost my job. Then I was dragged from my home by government thugs. They wore different uniforms than you, but were in uniform from my home. My brother, who helped me pack my things, said I needed to get used to change. "This is 2023, he said. "One door closes and another door opens," he says. My brother has a big mouth. At my new place in the sticks close to the forest, the fires worry me. I watch the news on CBC every night and have chats with my neighbor Ted about the fires. They didn't happen before. Not before Trudeau took over. Anyways, Ted says we need to fight the system. He said if we could get $500 together, we can drive to the Yukon and live in an abandoned cabin over the summer and get away from the lunatics in Calgary. Or, what's Ted's last name? BS. Bennett. 2 N's and 2 T's. So back to the story. Since Trudeau took over, everything is about pointing out other people's mistakes. People are always telling me what words I'm not supposed to say anymore. Well, thank God some things stay the same. Once a week, me and Ted walk to the Tim Hortons nearby. Even Timmy's didn't have a Christmas tree this year. But that's not going to stop Bernie from having the spirit of Christmas. At that other place, people just wouldn't listen to a woman with a gun. I wanted to shoot a bullet into the ceiling to stop them all yammering. And then you all came in. O.R. Thank you, Bernie. That's all we need today. We're still collecting evidence. Before I start shooting, there's something I'd like to say, Bernie announced. I hope you have a Merry Christmas. She turned from the cashier to the barista. And you too. Merry Christmas. Ma'am, here's your latte, and have a Merry Christmas, the cashier said. Then he added, I don't usually say that, and looked at the other people listening in the store. They had stopped talking to each other and were paying attention closely, in the way every high school teacher dreams of. Bernie gave everyone present a stern look, one that showed she meant business. Her arm was getting tired. She forgot how heavy guns were. The cashier had been holding his hands up for quite a while and was getting tired too. Sorry, ma'am. I can't give you all the money in the cash register, he said slowly and calmly, because this is a cashless store. His eyeballs moved back and forth between Bernie and the sign next to the cash register. It said, This is a cashless store. Bernie groaned. It's because of those people from Toronto again. I'm from Calgary, the cashier explained. Bernie didn't know how to respond to that. Doesn't your son come in here? The cashier asked. Bernie realized at that moment she should have worn a disguise. Outside, flashing red lights appeared. Bernie watched with concern as police cars filled the parking lot. The cashier, in a kind voice, the tone a person might use to give a suggestion to a friend that the color of his sweater doesn't match his pants, said, They might shoot you if you're holding that gun. It doesn't matter what age you are. As Bernie thought about putting the gun down, one of the police looked into the window and then walked straight in. Bernie has thought they might surround the building and start a kidnapping negotiation. She had planned to ask for a taxi to the Yukon to let everyone go. Bernie Schultz? The policeman asked. Who's asking? Let's take you back to Sage Hill, he said, and walked straight toward her. Bernie lowered the gun that lacked bullets. Her gig was up. The police knew retirees in Calgary wouldn't give up their guns, but the retirement homes had taken away their bullets. The cashier cleared his throat. Just for my Instagram account. Why were you trying to rob the store? Bernie wanted to quote Willie Sutton, because that's where all the money is. But it didn't seem to fit this situation anymore. She mulled it over. The police weren't in a rush. She told the cashier, For once, I just wanted to be in control of my own life. The cashier thought about it, then said, The office workers that come into our store and put in complicated orders, I think have the same reason. When he noticed how many people were watching him, he added, Not that that stereotype is representative of all people who work in offices. In the language of her own generation, Bernie explained that she also didn't mean any offense to anyone by her words and actions that day. Sorry, she said. She left the store with the police, one holding her shoulder in case she tripped on the front step. Justice will be served. Sunrise painted the rain-swept rocks of the castle gold as she poured poison into her husband's morning whiskey. The fire of the spirit would mask the ice of the paralytic which had been crippling Lord Blackstone for months. Lady Gemma Blackstone had everything arranged for the death of her husband would be slow, deservedly so. Revenge was a dish best served cold, and Algernon Blackstone liked ice in his whiskey. Gemma watched the chest of her hated husband rise and fall. His crackling breaths came in stutters. The poison had started work on his lungs. She has lessened the dose to ensure he didn't die suddenly. Everyone needed to know was that Lord Blackstone was a sick man. His twisted mind would meet its match in the gnarled agony of his flesh. She smiled sweetly, best to always smile in case he was looking. Gemma played the part of a doting wife. She fluffed his pillows. She changed the bedpan. She stoked the fire in the night when the servants were gone. "Gemma, is that you?" he rasped, coughing. "It's Algie. What can I get you?" she asked him in the simpering voice he knew her by. "How is it? Do you feel better?" "Maybe," he wheezed. "A solid breakfast will do me the word of good." Gemma nodded and called the butler. "Reginald, Lord Blackstone is awake. Bring the wheelchair." "My whiskey," Lord Blackstone wheezed. "Can't start the day without it." He took the ready crystal tumbler in stiff hands. She had to help him sip it down. "You know you shouldn't, my love. It's your worst vice." "All old men need vices." Lord Blackstone flashed his gold teeth, then closed his eyes in pain as his lungs shot through with agonizing needles of fire. Whiskey burnt away sleep. "Good morning, my lord," said Reginald. The wrinkled butler, older than the stones of the castle, wheeled in a chair that creaked with every turn of the oak wheels. "Good morning, Lady Blackstone." "Good morning, Reginald," she said. Together they helped the gnarled old man into his chair. The butler insisted on pushing him to the dining room. Above the table hung a painting of a hanging family entitled "Justice Will Be Served." Gemma had commissioned the painting to remind her of her mission. Algernon Blackstone had her entire family executed for theft when she was just a girl. Gemma had escaped only because she'd been out on an errand when her mother, father, brother, and sister were sent to the gallows. Only her father had stolen, and only enough food to feed the children. The standard punishment had been the loss of a hand, an acceptable risk for a man who wanted to feed his loved ones. Instead, the Lord of Blackstone Castle had chosen to make an example of the whole Fisher family. High on her stool on the gallows, Gemma's mother had caught her eye. Before her footing was kicked away from her, Angela Fisher mouthed the words, "Live, live for us." Tears in Angela's eyes were the last things Gemma saw before the rope snapped, taut, and the quartet of condemned began kicking, faces twisted in horror. The painted faces looked little like her family, but the painter had captured the terror of the doomed. Gemma was grateful that the likeness of the painting was off. There was no chance anyone would connect her and her blue eyes to the brown-eyed quartet kicking above the banquet table. Justice will be served, Gemma promised herself as she did whenever she ate. Revenge had hardened her, but it was slow. Years of practicing her accent, her manners, which utensils to use, had honed her for the mission. A lord with a grudge against Algernon Blackstone had presented her to the widower as a cousin. Lecherous Lord Blackstone hadn't wasted a week before wedding himself to the teenaged Gemma. "The cook will be finished with breakfast shortly. Can I cut you some bread and spread it for you?" Reginald asked. The 80-year-old butler's perfect posture contrasted the bent back of Lord Blackstone. "Yes, please," Gemma nodded. Fresh bread, hot from the oven, steamed as the bread knife sawed through it. The wedge-shaped slice belied distraction as the butler watched the dining room door expectantly. Normally, his every cut was perfect. "Something on your mind, Reginald?" Algernon Blackstone asked, raising a graying eyebrow. "Just an anniversary of sorts, Lord Blackstone." Glowing life Gemma had never seen sparkled in Reginald's red-veined eyes. His smile unnerved her. Watching the door, she gripped a butter knife with white knuckles. "What are you up to?" The ancient doors whined on hinges that needed to be oiled as the cook entered with a covered tray. Walking down the table, Camilla set the tray down at the end. The silver dome revealed 2 matchlock pistols. Both were loaded and ready to fire. "Reginald? Camilla? What is this?" Lord Blackstone's voice was outraged. He tried to stand, shaking, but broke into a fit of coughing. The butler and cook began laughing. Camilla took both pistols, handed one to Reginald, and aimed hers at Gemma. "Do you remember the girl you had drowned for spilling soup in your lap?" asked Camilla. She waited for recognition in the Lord's eyes. "You don't, do you?" Victory morphed into outrage on the cook's face. "Was my daughter's life so forgettable to you?" "I don't," Lord Algernon began. "Soup!" Reginald yelled. "Spilled soup!" He leveled his pistol at Lord Blackstone. "You could have beaten her. You could have locked her in the stocks. You could have simply fired her. No, you killed her. Our beautiful girl drowned over fucking soup." Reginald's forever gray face was red. Veins throbbed in his forehead. "She was your daughter?" Algernon asked, looking from the butler to the cook to Lady Blackstone. "Our only daughter," Camilla nodded. "Who you killed 20 years ago today." 20 years? Gemma asked, unable to stop herself. "You waited 20 years? He killed my family 7 years ago, and I was nearly done with him." Camilla's gun aimed at her heart as she pointed at the painting above the table. "You commissioned that painting yourself," Reginald said. He waved his free hand at Justice Will Be Served, to remind me of the mother, father, sister, and brother he had hanged. Palms raised, Gemma pushed herself out of the gilded chair she'd been sitting in 3 times a day for years. "Your maiden name was Sinclair," Camilla snarled. "I was here when Lord William Sinclair delivered you to Lord Blackstone." With every word, Gemma saw the old woman working herself up to shooting Gemma. To him, she was as guilty as Lord Blackstone. He hated Algernon. "I told Lord Sinclair my marriage to Lord Blackstone would be his downfall. William was only too happy to help." "I'll have you all hanged," said Lord Blackstone. He slammed a gnarled fist into the table and winced. Convulsing, he clutched at his chest. "You'll never hurt anyone again," Gemma told him. "I've been seeing to that for months." She turned to Reginald. "I've been poisoning his morning whiskey." "What?" said Lord Blackstone, the butler and the cook as one. "It's no coincidence he can barely move," said Gemma, looking from Reginald to Camilla. "It's the poison." "You told me you believed in justice," wheezed Algernon Blackstone. "I do," said Gemma, her face releasing all of the anger she'd held in for years. "Justice for my mother Angela, for my father David, for my sister Alice, for my brother Darren, all murdered so that you could make a point." She prodded his chest. His hand moved to catch her finger at a snail's pace. "There's poison in my Janelle No. 5 perfume. I've been adding a drop to your whiskey since I bought the rat killer from a farmer at last year's summer fair. He stole from me. I had to set an example," said Lord Blackstone of her father. "Do you know how many one-handed thieves there were walking about in the town, making a mockery of justice, of the law?" He looked at the painting, unrepentant. He gathered his resolve. "Then you should have whipped him, locked him in the stocks, banished him." Gemma's voice was colder than the iron bars on Blackstone Castle's windows in midwinter. "I have a responsibility to uphold the law of the land. A liar like you could never understand. Lords maintain order, otherwise there would be chaos." He caught his wife's eye, imploring. "It was nothing personal, Gemma. I didn't know you." "That's the problem, Algernon. It's never personal. Life means nothing to you. Their daughter meant nothing to you. Lady Blackstone waved a hand at the butler and the cook. It's personal for us and everyone who's had their life destroyed by your twisted vision of justice. You're serious, aren't you? Reginald asked. Camilla, take the gun. I have to know. He handed his pistol to the woman who had prepared every meal Algernon had eaten for 20 years. His coattails flicked as he flitted through the dining hall door. His footsteps retreated, clattering along the flagstones. Gemma, said Lord Blackstone. Desperation was writ large in his bulging eyes. You've been my wife for 5 wonderful years. I've loved you with all my heart. I've had the hard task of keeping the peace in these parts, but I've never meant you harm. Gemma, I love you. Please don't do this. He pressed his palms together. In the name of God, spare me. God? Gemma scoffed. Love? She slapped the table, giving Algernon and Camilla a fright. You would have hung me with the rest of my family if I hadn't been checking the family crab traps. I returned to find my entire family on the gallows on your order. I watched them hang because you had decreed it. Tears of anger ran through her powder makeup. God may have said, "Thou shalt not steal," but I'm sure he gave precedence to "Thou shalt not kill." You have a lot of blood on your hands, Lord Blackstone. At his title, Gemma turned on the stately accent which had been slipping as she told her story. Don't think I trust you, said the cook to Lady Blackstone. I've watched you playing the doting wife for years. I've seen you fawning over this monster. I've heard you praise his firm hand for the law. The gray hair of the old woman was slick with sweat that beaded on her forehead. That's all it was, Camilla. An act. You must have known my mother Angela, and me. My name is Jenny Fisher. I lived in Blackstone until the day he hung my family. I ran to Winshore to escape. I learned to copy Lord Sinclair, working in his kitchen. I learnt the way the gardener poisoned foxes and rats. I formed a plan. I convinced Lord Sinclair to pass me off as his own to spite Lord Blackstone. Jenny Fisher took a deep breath before her next admission. Then I killed Lord Sinclair. What? Algernon turned to look at her. A murderess in my bed all these years. I was in good company as far as that goes, Jenny said coldly, the lesser of two evils. Lord Sinclair was no saint himself. She chewed her nail as the sound of Reginald's perfectly shined shoes returned. I don't know what's in this bottle, said the butter, holding up the exquisite green glass. But it's not perfume. It's certainly not Janelle number 5. None of it touched you, did it? Jenny asked. A drop is dangerous. 3 is death. She's telling the truth? Camilla asked. The gun aimed at Lady Blackstone lowered from Jenny's heart to her stomach. This is too much. Lord Blackstone has no shortage of enemies. That's no secret. Reginald took a gun from his wife and sat heavily 5 seats down from the lord and lady of the castle. How can we know for sure she's telling the truth? Camilla asked. We've waited all these years. I'm not letting revenge slip away after all that time. I want to see the light leave his eyes. I want to watch his soul leave this husk on the way to hell. Camilla, please. Algernon's lip quivered. You shut your murderous mouth, Lord Blackstone. I want nothing but death from you. Camilla stretched her arm from point blank until the barrel was 1 chair from the wretch who'd brought them all together. Let me do what I was planning to do. Jenny tilted her head as her mother had when she'd haggled with Sellers. He drinks from that bottle, as much as he likes. We can all watch justice be done. That way you'll know. Gemma! Algernon Blackstone tried to stand and coughed up mucus and blood for his futile efforts. My name is Jenny Fisher, always was. always will be, daughter of Angela and David, sister to Alice and Darren. I want you to know that as you die." Her dress, green silk and cotton, fluffed her out to twice the size as she stood by his side. "We have glasses. Let me serve him." "Number, I'm not drinking anything you give me," Lord Blackstone said with steel in his voice. "Then let them shoot you." "I'm sure that hurts more," said Jenny with a cruel smile. "Whether you die isn't up for debate, husband. Your choice now is how you want to go." Reaching across the long table, she took an empty glass and opened her hand, waiting for the green bottle in Reginald's grip. When he handed her the former perfume container, she poured a shot of it into the waiting glass and handed it to Lord Blackstone. Silence took a seat beside them at the table and waited patiently. Harsh winds from across the sea could scarcely be heard over the sound of the host's labored breathing. Algernon Blackstone stared at the clear liquid in the glass, pure as water. His hand trembled. "I can't smell it," said the Lord of Blackstone Castle. "That was the point, husband." The woman he'd known as Gemma for years watched him expectantly. "This or a gun wound?" he asked, raising the glass of death. "You could jump from the battlements onto the rocks if you like," said Camilla. "I've dreamed of pushing you off them for years." "Justice will be served," said Lord Algernon. His shoulders sank. "Is it too late to say that I'm sorry?" He looked from one executioner to another. "No," said Reginald. "But it's far too late for an apology to get you out of this." Algernon coughed. Closing his eyes, he nodded. "Well, I'm sorry anyway. I tried to see the world in black and white. It was easier that way." He swirled his doom in the glass. "It tasted fine in whiskey. If I'm to go, can it be in bed? One last sleep?" "What do you think?" Reginald asked Camilla. "As long as it's done." The cook nodded. "Back to bed then, Lord Blackstone." The butler took the glass from Algernon's shaking hands, gave it to his wife, then wheeled his master away. Jenny walked behind Reginald with Camilla's gun aimed at her back. The butler helped the lord into his four-poster bed. Jenny filled the rest of the glass with amber alcohol and handed it to her husband. "Looks delicious," said Lord Blackstone. He gave them all a vicious smile. "I forgive you for murdering me. Hopefully you can all find peace together, knowing what you did, what you are." Laughing through a cough, he drank down his whiskey. "Trying to divide us with your last words?" Jenny sat by Lord Algernon's side. "How you? Just remember my family as you die." She took his hand, already immobile. "And our daughter," said Camilla. "He can't talk," said Jenny. "He's not breathing. This is the end." She looked into Algernon's bulging eyes. "Justice is served." Lord Blackstone's chest stopped moving. He twitched weakly, then ceased. "Is he dead?" Reginald asked. "Number not yet, but it is inevitable now." Jenny closed the liver-spotted eyelids of her husband. His skin was cold. Her fingers on his neck felt the beat of his heart slowing to a stop. "It's done. I thought I would feel something." Camilla looked at Reginald. "I thought I would feel some peace at last." "What now?" Reginald asked. "Breakfast?" Lady Blackstone suggested. The day had not gone as planned. She had 2 loose ends to tie off and always planned better on a full stomach.